I'd like to welcome Rachel Willoughby, Rachel Service Director of Wellbeing at what is now called WDH, which was formerly Wakefield District Council.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me down from a bit further up north to talk about this. Apologies to anybody who's heard bits of it before, but hopefully it is of interest, and it is about the real life of what we found running the demonstration project, which was specifically to test the direct payment of housing costs to tenants who were used to payment by another method. So basically what it was, to talk to you about the scope of the Wakefield project, is that we are one RSL, formerly stock transfer, working with one local authority. Within the demonstration project, there were 6 different project areas, all with different characteristics and makeup, and the project ran from June 12 to December 13. It was independently researched through Crazer at Sheffield Hallam and through Ipsos Mori. Lots of stuff written about it, and I'd urge you to have a look at some of the stuff Crazer wrote and some of their findings about what happened. And the aim of it was to inform policy and shape the way payments are delivered. For the DWP, as far as we were advised, they wanted to demonstrate to the sector that with the right design, direct payment could be made with minimal impact on income streams, and also to test the effectiveness of budgeting support and claimant communications. For us, we wanted to learn what would happen to claimants. We wanted to look at the factors that would affect them making payment or not, understand the best and most effective forms of support to help them manage their income, and also to have influence about decisions on claimants who needed support. We had 1,082 tenants receive payments altogether. At the end of the project, 385 of those reverted back to payment to WDH. We'd got 576 tenants still receiving direct payment, and then we made some further decisions. Interestingly, about a quarter of them were in credit at the end of the payment, at the end of each week the payments were made. And this is despite the fact that actually they also received their payment effectively on the 5th week. It was a monthly payment, it was made direct to them, everybody was paid at the same time because it went with the housing benefit run, but some tenants did manage to build up a credit. Did we have influence? Yes, I think we did as project areas. I think we shaped some of the outcomes, and I think we help inform things like the alternative payment arrangement and about percentages of people who might need alternative payment arrangements, either permanently or temporary. I think we managed to dispel some myths around what people would and wouldn't do. We learned an awful lot. It's probably one of the best things that Wakefield ever did in terms of our learning for going forward. But we dispelled things like, was there a tipping point? Was there a point at which a tenant did something happened and then they could never recover this? We found that there wasn't. We dispelled things around a Christmas payment that most people would be deemed to keep. Amazingly, Christmas occurs when it's quite cold really, so people maybe not spending on presents, they're spending on heating. Did being on direct payment have any influence on whether or not people took employment? We could find no evidence it did, and in a way, why would it? Because I think there were other barriers. And interestingly, we were asked to look at whether people coped better with things like other changes, such as and I will say bedroom tax, because they were in direct payment. Again, we had no evidence of it, but why would there be? So, what did we learn? Time spent preparing people was beneficial. Communication is key. The more time you've got to work with people in advance, the better. Our difficulty was we got people to take part in this by telling them UC had come around October 13 and then it didn't. So some of that work has actually gone to waste, and that ever-moving timetable has proved a real challenge, I think, really for us. We're actually in tranche 4, so we're not expecting much till after Christmas now, and that's a long, long time since we first started. The difficulty is getting people to think about preparing, getting ready, making those changes when, they're hoping that things will be better in 3 or 6 months. So that's still there. Looking at who will and won't manage, really difficult, wasn't straightforward, new issues arose. We made judgments, assumptions about who would and wouldn't cope. They weren't always accurate. In fact, sometimes they were wildly inaccurate. The information that we had about who needed help, what were their vulnerabilities, was useful, it was some guide, but it wasn't the be-all and end-all. And it's really difficult to work out how much to record and keep. Personal information about somebody, you've got to be aware of data protection, you've got to be aware of how that might be shared, and what that really means. Housing benefit was often used to cope with emergency events. You've mentioned sanctions. We had lots of people who used their housing benefit when they got sanctioned. What would you do? We had a lot of people who used it to cope with other emergency events, vets bills, buying household appliances, possibly didn't seek other help that was available, whether they knew about it or not. You can argue, you know, this is all what people told us. You can argue, is it accurate or not, but that's as it was. But more often than people actually using it all for something was that people kept a bit. They used a little bit here and there. And the other thing that happened very regularly was that it was used for other charges. So, for example, went into their bank account and it was taken for bank charges. We must have paid thousands of pounds in utility costs, paid off loans, recurring payment arrangements that people weren't in control of. That took the housing benefit that had gone in their bank account, and as a result, they had nothing to pay us. Relatively low take-up of budgeting support, and this was common across the project areas, and it was also difficult to measure how effective this is. For that reason, because of our size perhaps and our geographical situation, we're doing a lot of our budgeting support ourselves going forward. It's not the right thing for everybody. There's a lot of other good sources of budgeting support, but it's going to be right to us really. At the end of the day, no doubt you need more resources, you're going to collect less. You can't, as a landlord, get exactly the same as you got when housing benefits pushed that button and all that money came to you. Bits go here and there. There have been some differences between the project and between what UC will be. Obviously, housing benefits are administered locally at the moment, and we just had that one-on-one relationship. What we did try to do, though, was limit what we shared in preparation for an expectation that we wouldn't have a lot of information shared in the future. There's a lot around data sharing, and some of it has been enshrined now as to what will happen, but I still think it's going to be more difficult when you're perhaps dealing with remote centres. As I say, we had one bulk payment every 4 weeks against an existing timetable. That's going to be different when, for us, all our tenants will get paid at different frequencies across the month. But we also started thinking, oh, everybody gets all their money at once. No, they don't. For the people who are working, for the people who are getting child benefit, got money coming from other sources, they may be getting bits of money here, there and everywhere. And how they make that work for them is almost peculiar to each tenant. We work differently in terms of the safeguarding and the switchbacks. That is the point at which payment comes back to the landlord. We use local housing allowance to assess who we thought would or wouldn't cope at the beginning. And it was mentioned about Tier 1 and Tier 2 in terms of assessing that going forward. But I think what we really found was no two people in similar circumstances necessarily behaved the same way. So it's about people's support in the background. It might be about family support. That might be how they manage. And you can't really, you really can't quantify all of that or hold it in any one system, or maybe even write it into a system. We've used our learning to prepare us going forward, to develop our own systems, to look at our own processes. Wakefield has what's called rent-free weeks. I'm not sure how common they are here or how common they are, and which you'd know if you were not a tenant of an organisation that had them. But that's the difference, and that's going to lead to some arrears situations. We're going to look at new ways of working. We do a lot more mobile working. We're going to look to do a lot more one-to-one work with our tenants. And we're also looking at more ways of working with them to develop their employment skills, to develop their digital skills. And I think there's a lot around building loyalty, and through that contact, hopefully, in raising ourselves up there in the payment priority order. At the end of the day, the big risk here is that people will build up rent arrears. That's a big risk for us as a business and for any housing association. It may all be cash flow, it may come in later, but there'll be an awful temptation to use a landlord as a lender of no cost really. And again, I would say simply, well, why wouldn't you? I think we have used our learning from the project at events like this, but to share learning with other associations, and hopefully that be helpful to them. To try and make their plans. We've done smaller projects as well. We've put other tenants into direct payment to just test and get them ready, really. What we have seen is we've seen increased numbers of tenants having direct payment now in Wakefield area. Traditionally, I would say almost all our tenants on benefits, bar a handful, on housing benefit, had that housing benefit paid to us. That has actually gradually eroded, and we're now looking at about 44% of tenants having housing benefit direct to us, from around about the 60% mark a few years ago. Some of that will have gone because people have got into work as well, but certainly there has been some change. What we've also found, though, is that our tenants didn't understand necessarily the relationship of the rent payment process. Some did say, oh, no, I don't pay rent. They would say, but I get my money on this frequency. They got mixed up about monthly payments, about 4 weekly payments, how that cycle ran, how the rent-free weeks operated into it. So there was a lot about, information around that. What we have done, our current initiatives, we've had a project focused on single tenants receiving housing benefit of 50% or less. A lot of these are people who have got a job. In fact, they've actually got 2 jobs or 3 jobs. They're juggling those incomes. And we're finding a lot more about people who perhaps don't owe us any money, but are in really precarious situations. We're looking at ways we can help them through that. We're looking at Switch and Save for energy. We're looking at reviewing their water charges. Again, in Wakefield, about 90% of our tenants pay water rates to us, but water rates aren't right for everyone. And at the end of the day, maybe that's another area they can make savings on. And we're also looking at employment programme that focuses specifically on our tenants and their households. Some of the other things we've changed is our tenancy ready process, and this is at the beginning of a tenancy. This is prior to an offer being made, looking at what might cause someone to fail and working with them as early as we can to get that to get that process right, because there's nothing worse than putting someone in a property that they can't afford, that they aren't going to manage, and then have all that churn and turnover and actual misery for them as well. It's proved better for us, it's proved better for our business, it's proved better for our tenants, I hope, but obviously it's clearly an issue if you're getting people applying who cannot physically afford to live independently and are struggling for any alternative. Just going forward in UC, and I'll just cover this really quickly because I'm nearly to time, and that's why I keep pressing this because I put a timer on. There are a lot of impacts for allocations as well. That's when properties are offered. Moving home and having 2 homes, real impact here is that there's going to be no overlapping housing cost allowance under UC. That's got a big impact if people are moving from one tenancy to another and might be required to give a formal notice. There are changes around people moving from a hospital or a care home into a tenancy and the limits on periods for which they can receive benefit. Similarly, if they're waiting for adaptations. Processes going forward, things like under occupation, the household benefit cap, how we're going to deal with those and the impacts it's going to have. In Wakefield, we had about a 20% increase in vacancies during the first year of under occupation, and that again impacts on sustainability, and it impacts on the cost of turning around properties. It impacts on that churn on your estate and your business. We do work closely with local welfare provision and the DHP. You make use of the DHP pot, but again, the demands on there, the restrictions on those funds means that I think things are going to be considerably more difficult going forward. Thank you.